And in this first section, we're going to talk about what is a story. Now, for this first learning module, I'm going to break it into two parts. In this first part, I'm going to talk about the narrative arc, and I'm also going to give us some context that's in the first part of the book that we're reading, which is not part of your assigned reading, but I'm going to tell you a little bit about anyways. Then we'll get into the narrative arc. And the second video is going to talk about the hero's journey. So we've told some stories about our lives, and hopefully we got a sense from those a little bit about what makes a good story and what elements go into a story. We'll go through story elements next week. But why do we use stories to communicate? And in the opening section of Design and Storytelling, the author Ellen Lupton tells a story about her going to a conference and her meeting a young designer. So stories, they help us depict action, they stimulate curiosity, they also convey emotion, feeling, and personality. Hopefully we learned a little bit about the personality of some of our classmates in the stories that we heard, but they also, some of them had deep emotions and feelings, and some of them merely told a story of action and things that occurred. They can help us, stories can help us communicate. They can hook the imagination of users, and they invite actions and behaviors. So we can think a little bit about the why we're going to be doing storytelling. That sometimes we tell stories in order to have people learn about us. Sometimes we tell stories to have them learn about a brand. And sometimes we want people to do things. And we want to make sure that if we are getting people to do things, that we do it effectively. So stories can be a great way that we can have not just communication, but action. So in our course, we're going to combine psychology of visual communication, so why things communicate visually, and we're going to add in the narrative point of view. It's not just going to be maybe a static single image, but we're going to bring things together in such a way that we have this beginning, middle, and end that I'm going to get to. That is the narrative arc. And in the story, in the inciting incidents of Ellen Lupton's Design and Storytelling, she asked this young designer what, excites you about storytelling and design. And the young woman said, well, what excites me about design is the potential to transfer information into someone else's mind. And design does that, but stories do that too. We are finding ways to get an idea from us to you, or from me to you. So the book that we have, just as an overview, it has 3 acts. Just as we're about to see soon, stories have 3 parts. So Act 1, which we're going to be starting with today, is action. It explores the patterns that underline almost every story. And we're going to get into emotion and how as communicators we play with feelings, moods, and associations for our viewers and users. We may get a chance to get into Act 3, which is sensation, which looks at kind of the mind part of things. How does our thinking change our perception? We're going to focus predominantly on Acts 1 and 2. So how is a roller coaster like a story? Action. Like a filmmaker pauses right before the villain jumps out of the closet, a roller coaster hangs for just a moment at the top of its climb before plummeting towards the ground. Roller coaster designers work to amplify the emotional intensity of the ride, drawing out suspense towards the zenith. So we are going to have a look at how a story is like a roller coaster. Now, this particular illustration by a favorite illustrator of mine, Grant Snyder, kind of makes it, there's a little bit more going on than our basic beginning, middle, and end. But some of the main areas we're going to get to in here, the rising action, we have a climax, and we have a falling action. Now, he's got some extraneous scenery going on in there. There's some twists and some plot holes, but then we're going to get to the denouement, and then we finish up with a ending. And in here, we have the critical reaction of everybody who is dazed from their ride on the roller coaster. And hopefully you don't get trapped in that unresolved subplot and you go falling into the ocean. However we're communicating visually, if this is going to be a movie, if this is going to be a photo, a series of photos, so our first kind kind of larger piece, we're going to have 3 photos, a drawing, or an app. We're structuring an experience for a viewer to interact with. Even if it's a still image, we're structuring it in such a way that your eye moves around the page. And in storytelling, we're specifically working with some kind of time, a progression of time, even if it's not a time-based medium like a movie. Aristotle looked at Oedipus Rex as being a way to understand all stories. He thinks that you can kind of tell all story structure through the story of Oedipus Rex. And while we won't get into the nitty-gritty details, Freud can do that if you take a psychology class. We can look specifically at the riddle that the Sphinx poses to Oedipus in order to get by her as being a great mini story within the story that tells us everything we need to know about storytelling. One of the things about stories, good stories, is that they'll ask questions but delay the answer. It's that pause at the top of the arc of the roller coaster before you plummet down. That moment where you have that suspension of disbelief, you have the suspension in the air where your kinetic energy turns into potential energy, and then you go plummeting. Maybe it's the other way around. My physics is messed up. But the question that the Sphinx poses to Oedipus is, what walks on 4 legs in the morning, on 2 legs in the afternoon, and at 3 legs in the evening? And Oedipus is quite a clever man, and he realizes that she doesn't literally mean in a 24-hour day, but in the day that comprises our lives. And a human starts off crawling on all 4s in the morning, and hopefully by the afternoon, we're able to walk on our 2 legs. But by the evening, as our life is drawing to a close, we need some aid in our walking, and so we have a walking stick. And so in the evening, we have 3 legs. And so Oedipus answers that a human being is a creature that walks on 4 legs in the morning, 2 legs in the afternoon, and 3 legs in the evening. And the Sphinx says, correct, you get to pass. You go through the Thebes, this lane only, riddles. You don't have to pay cash or easy pass. And that is very much how structures of our life and stories are the same. They have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And if you break all stories down to their absolute barest bones, they should have those 3 things. We have, if we get a little bit more technical, we are going to have our beginning is our exposition. We tell people about the story. We set the setting. We have our rising action. Things are happening. Action. Crisis. We hit our peak. Then we have our climax, and we start to have resolution. And then we go plummeting down in our falling action, also known as dénouement. And then we have our end. So we start off walking on 4 legs at the beginning in our exposition. By crisis, we're walking on 2. And then at the end of our lives, we have our resolution. This narrative arc was codified into the exposition, rising action, climax, falling action, and dénouement by Gustave Freytag in the 1800s. Dénouement is French for unknot, and that is the resolution of your story. So as an example, even something as simple as the 3 little pigs, you can map into the narrative arc. Now, the thing about really good stories is they don't just have a beginning, a middle, and an end. They don't just have a beginning, a climax, and a resolution. You'll often have little climaxes that build towards the biggest climax. And you can see that here in the mapping of the 3 little pigs. So, exposition, 3 little pigs are deciding to build a house. You've got rising action. The first pig makes a house out of straw. Then you have a conflict. You have a little climax where the wolf blows down the house. Falling action. Well, then we pick ourselves back up. We take our second house out of wood. But the wolf blows that house down too. Now we have the third pig makes their house out of bricks. The wolf cannot blow down the brick house. So he climbs in through the chimney. And so that is our crisis and our climax. He's figured out a way around it. And in our dénouement, oops, he falls into a pot on the fire, and then they can eat him. Or in Alan Lupton's version. They acquire Wolfcam home security system and they protect against future wolf invasions. A little bit different from Grimm's. So we need something that's going to call us to action. We need something in the exposition that's going to drive us forward, to have conflict that makes it interesting. When we talk about very specific elements of our story, spoiler alert, one of those is going to be conflict. It's going to drive us. It's going to make things interesting. It gives us a goal. We understand why. Now, our exposition tells us why that goal is important to us. But the conflict makes us want to know what happens next. And then you need to wrap it all up in a nice little bow. Or you hope you do. Now, this pattern, beginning, middle, and end, you have your exposition, your climax, and your resolution. It's comforting because we know it. And we want things to have a beginning, middle, and an end. If it doesn't have a resolution, then we feel like something's missing. And we find that this pattern occurs all over the place. It occurs in our physical cycles just as much as it occurs in our stories. So we're going to look at a more complex example with the hero's journey next. But I want you to keep in mind those three elements: beginning, middle, and end, exposition, rising action to your climax, your denouement, and your resolution, as being integral to any story that you tell.